Good morning, another beautiful morning, and I hope you all enjoyed the Austrian Grand Prix. What a race it was! I thought it was great fun, spectacular, had action, had controversy. It had strategy, it had people breaking down from the lead of the race. I mean, it had a bit of everything. It had cars out of position, all the ingredients to make a fantastic Grand Prix, and it definitely delivered. So, really well done to the Austrian Grand Prix organisers. I thought it was a great event. It's always a spectacular location, one of my favourite tracks, that one. It's a track that bites if you get it wrong, and you know, unlike a street, not like a street circuit where you've got the walls, but you've got aggressive curbs that you just have to stay off. And it's such a simple solution. Yes, it breaks cars and you get it wrong, but you know, don't get it wrong. So I love that. I love going to that circuit. I think the drivers enjoy it too. It's a short lap, but it's a fast lap, and it's a good track. So well done. That was great. Hope everyone enjoyed it. But today is Q&A Monday, and I've got loads of questions to get through. So let's get started. Now today's Q&A is going to be on the move because I've got a busy day, quite a lot happening, so you'll be picking up as and where I can from various places that I've got to go to today. But let's start with this question. I've picked this one from Forrest Gump, but actually lots of people asked a very similar type of question, and it was all about tyres and how on earth did Max Verstappen manage to make his soft tyres last so much better than people like Lewis Hamilton, Daniel Ricciardo and others behind him. Right, well, there's a very simple answer, and the simple answer was that he was out in front. And when you're out in front, it's much easier to control the race and to control your driving style to look after your tyres. Now, this leads into a slightly more complex answer, and I think something that was specific to the Austrian Grand Prix. This time around, first of all, we had very high track temperatures on Sunday, much higher than we had on Friday when the soft tyres were last run in practice. I think it was something like 12 degrees hotter on race day, which is a significant amount and has a significant effect on the way the tyres behave. The second thing, and so that is what causes the blistering, it's temperature related. I said in the preview that this would be a rear dominated or a rear limited circuit because there's lots of kind of right angle type corners where it's traction limited. So it's all about getting the traction down, getting the power down on the car without spinning up the rear wheels as soon as you can past the apex of a corner. If you do start to spin up the wheels, you build up localized heat on the surface of the tyre, and it's very easy to do, and in those temperatures you start to get blistering and then a partial delamination. So that's what was happening with lots of the drivers. The reason I think it was such an issue this week was that we had 3 DRS zones in Austria for the first time. And on a high-speed track like Austria, when pretty much every straight is a DRS zone, it's absolutely imperative for your lap time that you are activating DRS. And to do that, you need to be within a second, as you know, of the car in front. Because if you don't manage to get that DRS activated, you lose a significant chunk of your lap time. Because it's such a high-speed track, full throttle for lots of it. If you can dump a bunch of drag with DRS, it really is beneficial to you over the course of a lap like that. Now, the downside of being within a second of the car in front, which you're really encouraged to do when there are 3 DRS zones, is that you're also in the midst of that really disturbed wake of coming off the car in front, that turbulent airflow that we hear about so much that upsets the balance and the downforce of the following car. So under a normal circumstances race, you might take the decision as a driver through part of the middle part of a stint, for example, to drop back 2 or 3 seconds from the car in front if you don't think you're fast enough to get past him at that point. You might drop back to conserve your tyres, bide your time, just stay with him but don't stay too close so that you keep the downforce, you don't start losing grip at the rear of the car and end up with the blistering issues that we had. In Austria, we couldn't do that because you would have cost yourself too much lap time. So everyone having to stay within a second, therefore struggling because you lose the downforce, particularly the rear downforce, which is so crucial to getting that traction down out of the corners, and therefore you spin up the tyres, you start to slide around, and you increase that surface temperature to a point where it becomes a real issue. Hold on, the ducks are back. So I think, in a slightly long-winded way of explaining that, but I think that was one of the issues we had in Austria, which was slightly unique to not just that track, but this year with that extra DRS zone. And of course, Max Verstappen out front didn't have to worry about any of that. He didn't have any cars to follow. He was leading the race for a large part of it, and therefore was able to control his pace, was able to kind of run in the clean air at the front, not losing downforce, and therefore was able to look after his tyres far, far better than anybody else. The Red Bull's also a car that is generally quite light on its tyres anyway, but with that added bonus of leading the race from the front, it really gave him a massive advantage on a day when tyre temperature was going to be the deciding factor as to whether you could make it through the race on one stint or having to make a second pit stop. Ernie Black says, on the face of it, it would appear that Mercedes really stuffed it up with Lewis Hamilton's pit strategy. What do you believe to be the intent behind making that call? Well, look, they did stuff it up, is the bottom line of it. You heard James come on the radio and apologise very publicly to Lewis. I thought that was a nice touch and a good strategic touch, because it immediately started to alleviate Lewis Hamilton's kind of mindset of being so frustrated in that he had somebody to blame. It was the most senior strategy man on the team who'd taken the blame for that very publicly. So Lewis was then able to get on with the job. So I thought that was good. In terms of why they did or didn't make that pit call when everyone else around them did, well, it was just an error. They had about, Mercedes have even come out and explained this themselves, but they said they had about a half a lap between the VSC being thrown and reaching the pit entry. Half a lap is not very much around Austria, and so you've got to make a decision very quickly. And the thing that they were factoring in, and I think the thing that made them hesitate on this, was that they, of course, and the reason the VSC came out was that Valtteri, his car had failed. So Mercedes were down to one car with just Lewis Hamilton in the fight. Those around them, the Ferraris and the Red Bulls, still had two cars in that race at that stage. And can you imagine, or they were trying to imagine, what the opposition would do? They were thinking that Ferrari might just pit one of their cars, so split their strategies, which would leave Lewis Hamilton fighting two Ferraris on different strategies. And if they pitted, and for example, Ferrari left Kimi out to be this sort of the car that went long on that first stint, they would emerge from the VSC with Lewis behind Kimi, potentially holding things up at the front. So they would have lost track position to, you know, their main rival in Ferrari. And I think what they did was they ran over that situation so many times in their mind, they discussed it so much between them, instead of actually just using a bit of common sense and kind of looking out the window. It's a bit like this thing with, I always refer to it when it's looking like it could rain at Formula One races. They go to the radar, they go to their sort of radar trucks that they always used to have stationed up in the hills. They'll consult the meteorologist, and they'll talk about it so much when actually sometimes you just got to look out the window and see if it's raining, or hold your hand outside from underneath the timing stand, see if it's raining. Sometimes, with all the technology that we have, with all the processes and systems that we have in a Formula One team, sometimes you still have to rely on a little bit of experience and a little bit of common sense. And I suspect that what happened on Sunday was that Mercedes just didn't do that. They got lost in their own kind of processes and systems a little bit, read too much into it, and talked about it a bit too much. And by the time they had reached a kind of decision, it was unfortunately the wrong one, and it was time they had to continue past the pit lane, and the others all piled in for their pit stops. So I think in answer, Ernie, to your question, the reason that they made that call was they were trying to protect against a potential split strategy from Ferrari where they thought they would lose track position. The reality is that because everybody else pitted, they probably wouldn't have lost track position, but then would everyone else have made that same call had Lewis dived into the pit? So it's a very difficult thing. I'm always very reluctant to criticise a team's split-second strategy decision, because the pressure they're under, the time pressure and the bigger pressure that they're under to get that decision right is immense. You can't even imagine what those discussions are like in those few seconds before the decision has to be made. And, unfortunately on this occasion they got it wrong. Right, next job on the list is to empty the van from Claire's Antiques Fair at the weekend. But Giselle Mitton asked this question. How many of today's DNFs could have been caused by repeated wear and tear over the aggressive curbs that we had in Austria? Absolutely, I reckon some of them could well have been. If you think about the two Mercs, one lost hydraulic pressure, one lost fuel pressure. We don't know the absolute specifics of why and how that happened, but it could absolutely be as a consequence of bouncing over those really aggressive, really bumpy and brutal curbs around the edge of that racetrack. You can lose pressure in hydraulic systems and fuel pressure systems by things breaking, or by hoses leaking, or by clamps coming undone. There are a number of different reasons why those failures could have happened, but when you bounce a car so hard and so aggressively over some of that kind of curbing, absolutely that could be one of the effects. One thing Mercedes have said is that they're pretty confident it wasn't due to the upgraded power unit specs that they brought to the French Grand Prix. So in answer to that question, I think they're fairly safe in the knowledge that those upgrades are fine and they will continue to be used in future races. Coffee break. Leaf Burlskift says, do F1 drivers pay for their crash helmets considering they go through so many designs a season? F1 drivers don't pay for anything. It's all sponsorship deals. Each helmet supplier wants the best Formula 1 drivers to be using their brands, and so they throw them at them, and the F1 driver picks the one he likes best. Jay Rummers says, what's the difference between qualifying pace and race pace? Well, quite simply, race pace is the average pace, the average lap time that a car can manage to sustain over the length of a stint on each tyre, whereas qualifying pace is the ultimate lap time that a car can achieve within the configurations that the rules allow. Basically, that's it. Right, that's the van returned to the hire car company. Now I'm off to find where I parked my car on Friday. Martin Wildgust says on Twitter, if Kimi were to return to McLaren, would you go with him if he asked you? The simple answer to that is no. My days as an F1 mechanic are well and truly over. Not because I didn't enjoy it, but I love what I do now. Andy Curtis says, why do teams still use pit boards? They've got radio comms and screens in the cars to give them all the information they need. Surely they're not needed anymore. That's a good question, and actually you're not the only person to ask that. The answer is that they still use the pit boards, really, because most drivers don't want radio traffic in their earpieces all the time, every single lap. So if they were being relayed some of that information, it would constantly be upsetting them or disturbing their concentration. Equally, there isn't space on the screen to constantly be putting things like lap times, positions, laps left in the race, those kind of things. So those are the kinds of non-essential bits of information that are placed on the pit board every time, just to give the driver the option. If he wants to look at them on his way past, he can. He doesn't need to be informed over the radio, and he doesn't need to have space, valuable space taken up on his screen to put those on there. So they're kind of there just as an option for him. He can look if he wants to, he doesn't have to if he doesn't want to, but it's always there every lap just in case he needs it. Matthew Steer says, should Pirelli tyres have higher degradation rates? Because they would increase the number of pit stops and increase tyre strategy variation. Yes, I agree. I think we should be having softer, higher degradation tyres combined with a completely different type of tyre. So go back to where we tried it before, having a step in the chosen tyres that Pirelli bring. So a very hard tyre, an ultra soft tyre as well, because at the moment they're so close together that the difference is the time deltas between all three compounds are so small that it does mean that everyone ends up with the same strategy. So yeah, I'd love to see some variation in that. I'd love to see Pirelli and Formula One just trying something different, experimenting with more aggressive tyre choices, whether it be much harder at one end and much softer at the other. with a big gap in the middle to force teams to have a very different type of race at different stages of the Grand Prix. Now, I have just had confirmation, and I've just had visual confirmation as I've arrived home, from my friends at Jaguar have delivered a very special present for me for the week. You can just see it poking out at the front of my drive over there. Come and check this out. I've got an F-Type for the next week. That is bloody awesome. Thank you very much, Jaguar. I'm going to have a lot of fun with that. And finally, Kerry Beale says, are front wings shipped to races in component form or fully built? And would McLaren have had any issues in fitting the 2017 wing to Fernando Alonso's car for the race? So first of all, European races, when everything travels in the trucks, the front wings can travel as fully assembled components as long as the bits are all ready before the race. At flyaway races, when things are stripped down and put into flyaway containers, then they have to go as separate components, nose cones and wings in separate boxes and put together at the racetrack. In terms of did McLaren have any issues in fitting the 2017 nose to Fernando Alonso's car? Clearly not, he raced with it. Right, thank you very much. Love all the questions. Thank you, really appreciate them. Like, share and subscribe to the channel, please. I've got to go because I've got a new toy to play with.